Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning. And I'm Sati. I am the writer and director of Blood and Glory. I'm also an Army veteran.
Hi, I'll go next. I'm YJ Meira, and I'm the producer of Blood and Glory. And Sati and I had worked on another project together, and I was lucky enough for the stars to align to work with her on this one.
Hi, I'm Elis Salamone. I am an Army and Air Force veteran and a women's health nurse practitioner, and connected with Sati and YJ through their work with the film.
And so I'd love to hear from the filmmakers. What led you to create this film?
So a few years ago, while I was volunteering on Skid Row, for anybody who doesn't know, Blood and Glory is the story about a friendship between two female veterans who are living on the streets of LA. And they both sort of take care of each other and are trying to get their life back on track. But one of them suffers from severe PTSD. So it's really up to the other one, her battle buddy, to kind of try to find a job and try to create a better life for them. But on the day that she has a job interview, she wakes up with a really heavy period, and she doesn't have access to tampons or pads. And it's sort of how that derails their dreams for a better life. And so I hope if you have a chance, please check out the film. But the reason I wrote that project was because I used to volunteer on Skid Row. And for people who might not know, in LA, Skid Row is really a place where there's a concentration of homeless people. And all the shelters and resources are concentrated in that area and in downtown as well. So I was working with this organization called Monday Night Mission, and our goal would be to go serve food on weeknights. And one night while we were out there, I saw a woman walk past me, and she had her dog tags on and her combat boots on. And I could tell visually that she was a veteran. And she walked by me, and she looked like she had been on the streets for a while. When I saw her back, she had a large period stain. And that image devastated me. I mean, it was just something I hadn't thought about until that night. Leaving the military, transitioning to civilian life can be very challenging. I was lucky. I had a lot of resources. I had a community, a family. But for a lot of veterans, it's not that easy. And especially for female veterans, when you leave the military, there aren't resources for you in the same way there are for male veterans. And on top of that, the fact that period poverty is something that even I hadn't thought about. And how do you deal with your periods when you're on the streets? How do you deal with it when you're trying to find a job, to make your life better? It made me think about all these questions I hadn't thought about before. And I just kept imagining the life of this woman that I saw, and I couldn't get her out of my head. And that ended up becoming this project.
I mentioned that Sati and I had worked on a feature documentary together. So the way that I got involved with the project and learned about it is that Sati was a finalist for a program with an organization called Women in Media. And I think at this point she was a semi-finalist, and I saw her name. And so I reached out to her, and I was just like, congratulations. And then one thing led to another, and she's like, would you be interested in producing? So I said, I knew I'd love to work with her, but then she sent me the script, and it, like what she just said, it's something I hadn't thought about before. And, it really put things into perspective for how blessed and to some extent privileged that I had been to not think about that. And Sati has said before, this is a subject that we think about, and we often think like it's in another, in a third world country or in some other place, when in fact this is happening all around us. So I read the script, fell in love with it, and the rest is kind of history. Here we are.
What was the process in creating the film, from casting to partners? And then we'll talk more about the content in a bit as well.
I feel like I could keep going from there because that kind of ties right into where I got involved. So then Sati, just I think 1 or 2 short weeks later, found out she was one of the 3 finalists, which meant that women in media would support us from pre-production all the way through, post-production. And so from the moment she found out, we had 4 weeks to cast, find locations, hire a crew. And so we got right to work. And I think the 2 biggest pieces that we knew we needed pretty quickly was a casting director. We brought on someone who we met through Women in Media. Her name is Julianne Downing, and she just did such a phenomenal job reaching out and getting people. And I'll have Sati talk a little more about that specifically because I think this was definitely her vision. And then also locations. We were shooting in Los Angeles, and we were only going to have 3 days to shoot this film. So and with a very tight budget, as often short films are. So I think those are the first 2 things we jumped on doing. And we were really fortunate through Women in Media. One of their focus areas is to build a crew list of sorts of members of women above and below the line. So we were able to bring on a lot of our crew through those resources and that network. So it moved really fast. And I'll let Sati talk a little more about the casting process because it was pretty magical the way that we found Jamarla, our lead actress.
Yeah, no, Jamarla is the heart and soul of this movie. It was really important to us to cast from the veteran community. And so we wanted to, we had such a little time to cast, but we wanted to see if we could find a veteran who could play the lead role. And so Julianne, our casting director, put out casting calls everywhere. And we had amazing women, veterans and non-veterans audition for us. But I think when we saw Jamarla, she just blew us away. And this is actually one of her first short films where she's a lead. And the thing about her is her presence in the room and her connection to the story was just made the project richer because she ended up sharing her own journey. She was in the Navy for many years. When she left the Navy, she didn't have a clear path into what to do in the civilian world. And the things that she was trying to do was really hard because she had kids, and it's harder to put your life together after the military if you have other dependents as well that you have to take care of. And she found herself actually unhoused, having to make choices about how to feed her kids, and just all the stories that she shared. And those are her stories. Like I don't feel like I can share the stuff that she went through, but her own experiences really enriched this character. And I ended up rewriting the story based on the things that she had shared with me. And there was a time where she actually, had to think about stealing tampons because she didn't have access to them and she only had so much money to buy food for her kids. And so that realness to the story, I think made the film what it is. I don't think we could have done this without her. And then the rest of our cast came together and everybody just was like one piece of the puzzle, and it's actually kind of a miracle that this film happened so quickly, but such extraordinary people came together to make it. We had a crew of like over 90% women. And that was the first time I worked with so many women on a production. And every woman had a story about a time where they weren't at the right place at the right time when they had their period, and they had to deal with a period stain or the stigma or the shame around it. And so people just poured themselves into this, to making this movie. And I think that is what you see on the screen. It's like the labor of everyone's heart and their love and their soul,
All right. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit about just what it's like active military and periods. And so I'd love to talk about periods in military deployment. What is it like to be a menstruator who is deployed? And what kind of training or overview did you receive in preparation for deployment as a menstruator?
So I will tell you that there's no set training for women that are getting ready to deploy and how to handle your menstrual cycle. I will tell you as a women's health nurse practitioner that recently the Air Force and the Army has included a visit to the women's health clinic or to a women's health provider prior to deployment. However, most of that time, it happens within a week, maybe 2 weeks of deployment, and there's not a lot of intervention that we can do, but just do some education. And as a women's health nurse practitioner, what I often would try to do is talk to patients to say, you know, we can do menstrual suppression, which is stopping your periods through contraceptive resources like the Meira IUD or pills or the depot injection. And you can use that as a potential intervention to make your deployment one less barrier, one less challenge while you're out there. I will tell you, as someone that deployed to Afghanistan in the middle of nowhere, lucky for me, I did not have a menstruating issue at that particular time because I had recently had a hysterectomy. But I will tell you that if I was menstruating where I was at, I would have been in a lot of trouble because I wasn't anywhere near, I was in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan, and there was nowhere to really get products. And anything that we had, whether it was food or snacks or anything like that, would be flown in, thrown through helicopters. And that would be the way that we manage our inventory for, you know, health and hygiene products. So one of the big things I did as a nurse practitioner, though, when I did see soldiers, airmen, anyone that would come to see me, I would talk to them about menstrual suppression. What's interesting, though, is how many women felt that that was abnormal to do menstrual suppression and how many women weren't willing to really take that on. So then it's a matter of making sure that, you know, you talk to them about making sure that they are strategically placing products, you know, in all their bags and keeping products with them just in case they had, you know, a breakthrough bleeding, and just dealing with a lot of education at that point. I know that from other deployers, they have gotten, some of the organizations, NGOs are sending packages that are specific for women where they will add peri products, and that has been a constant, but unfortunately not everyone gets that.
From my experience, I wish somebody had talked to me about period suppression. I would have taken that in a heartbeat, but that was never presented as an option. In fact, when I deployed back in 2005, nobody talked about periods. It was, you know, when you're getting ready to deploy, they do a full physical check. You know, I got my wisdom teeth taken out, my eyes checked, my ears checked. You know, they want to make sure you're in a good health to go overseas. And the military gives you everything. You know, they give you your uniforms, your battle gear, even sports bras, because they know it's going to be so hot. I was deployed to Iraq, so they knew it was going to be so hot. So they wanted to give us, you know, the best sports bras for moisture, you know, wicking, with moisture wicking features and stuff like that. But nobody talked about periods. Nobody talked about how we would have access to period products during our deployment. So I ended up packing, I think, at least a 3-month supply when I was deploying, because we just didn't know where we were going to be and what it was going to be like. But luckily, I ended up being at a post where we did have a PX nearby where we could go whenever we needed to and buy those items, right? So I can't imagine being deployed to a more remote post and not knowing how to get these things. And it's just something, it's, you know, what's fascinating to me is that women have been menstruating from the beginning of time. And so this shouldn't be something that's, you know, that's a secret or a taboo, or like something that we're still trying to figure out how to do this with women in the military. Like, we should already have policy and plans in place, but we don't, you know, and I hope that changes.
Thank you. A lot of that is so surprising for folks who may not have thought about the the fact that's menstrual suppression. There's actually a research, because we talked about that, and I looked this up, and so it seems like about an average 7% of menstruators who are deployed choose to do menstrual suppression. However, from the research that was done, it seemed that 60 to 70% would have chosen to, Sati, to what your point, if they knew about the option. And so I think that's so interesting, because when you do the whole healthcare review, it just also goes to like the need of what healthcare providers may be aware of to even talk about with deployed members. So thank you for bringing that to light. That's really enlightening. So Sati, you just mentioned something about policy and how it would be great for this to be policy. I do want to mention in the film, there's actually a line where the cashier at the coffee shop, which if you've seen the film, you'll know. And if you haven't seen it yet, I'm excited for you all to check it out. The cashier at a coffee shop refuses to let the main character use the bathroom. And she's on her period, she needs to do her interview. And his response is, you can't go because policy is policy. And she was not a paying customer at the time. So I'd love to hear, that was an interesting line in the film. What policies do you think would just be helpful for service members to really have access to menstrual equity, both either as military who is being deployed or as veterans?
You know, I think this is something that goes back to education and people just really not making this a taboo subject. But I think for the military too, we forget that this is even an issue, and because we don't really talk about it. Let's say that you're getting ready to deploy and you have a male provider. That male provider may not even think about you menstruating and that becoming an issue or a topic that you need to discuss on how you're going to manage it. And menstrual suppression, for example, that's only something that's really come to light in the last maybe 5 or 10 years. So, you know, Sati, that's probably why nobody even mentioned it. Probably nobody even thought to speak to you about it. So I think from a policy standpoint, I just think it has to do with creating policies for women's health and making sure that there's education across the board for providers and for women to understand that they do have options, and to make sure that if they are deploying or if they're coming in the military, that this conversation it's had, because a lot of it is just, this is a crucial conversation that no one thinks to have, because it's as Sati said, this is we've been menstruating since since the world has started. So, you know, why is this such a taboo subject and why isn't anybody talking about it? But I think it's because it is such a taboo topic to speak of, you know, just even among women sometimes. I know that I deployed with other women in my remote location, and honestly, none of us ever really talked about how are you handling your cycle. It just wasn't something we talked about.
Yeah, and I think adding to that, one thing that could be helpful for women in the military is having some kind of a stipend for if you are having your period, to be able to buy products. The thing is, like, the cost of deployment for a man and woman is pretty much the same. You get everything is issued by the military and all of that, except that when it comes to your periods, you're spending so much money out of pocket trying to buy these products or trying to have your family mail it to you wherever you are, right? And so that cost ends up adding up, especially if you're a private in the military and you're not making that much money, you know? So I think even looking at that would be really useful for women, for female soldiers.
For any policymakers out there listening, this is that's why we asked this question, and for all of us advocates listening as well. Thank you. So yeah, it's amazing that the period products, as essential as they are, and I love that, Sati, you mentioned how you do get everything right in deployment that you would need, but as someone who menstruates, you need something else as well, and that's sometimes not talked about. So a few things I want to follow up from that, from the conversation. So Elis, you talked a little bit about how you don't talk about periods with people in the military. So I'd love to talk a little bit about stigma. What is the stigma around talking about periods with your friends in the military? And also, what does period stigma look like in the military with healthcare providers when you're deployed?
That's a great question. You know, I think that the only time periods really come up is if someone's having a problem. For example, they're bleeding too much, or they're having severe cramping, or they're dealing with an issue. Otherwise, I think as women, we just take it like this is part of life, and it doesn't It doesn't necessarily come up in conversation. I think as a women's health nurse practitioner, it's a little bit different for me because of the community I'm in of professionals, you know, where we talk about how can we help our patients and what are some of the things we can do to make things better. But I think in general, even as I think about my group of friends, and we're all military and retired and nurse practitioners and nurses, it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, do we really talk about our periods much? We talk about going through menopause, but not so much about our periods now or before. But I just think it's important to have maybe to just have these conversations, you know, even, you know, women going through basic. I mean, what do you do when you're going through basic training and you're someone that has really heavy, painful periods, but you still have to go through training? How do you get the supplies you need? How do you get the pain medication and Motrin on board so that you can get through training? So there's a lot of issues to be covered. And I think is right now, I know the Air Force is doing a really good job where they have a women's committee where they're changing policies for women across the board. But it's also getting the other branches on board to do the same thing, you know, especially when you have a branch like the Marine Corps where it's 90% men, you know, how do you change those policies for your female Marines so that they can continue to contribute and be impacted in a positive way with policies that embrace and empower women to continue to do the work they need to do, but also to manage their health so that they stay healthy and they're not dealing with barriers to their service.
Anybody else add on about just being deployed and just talking about it, and if it's embarrassing or not? And yeah, what is it like to talk about your period in the military?
I mean, I would say for me, so when I was deployed, I was 2021. So I was very young and I had a lot of internalized patriarchy, you can call it, right? Like, I think we, at that time, especially culturally, like, I think even I believed that being a woman was a hindrance in some ways, and being part of a very male culture and being surrounded by dudes all the time. Like, you want to be tough and you want to fit in and you want to show your team that you can do anything. Right. And so I think at that time, dealing with period pain or periods, like even I wasn't comfortable talking about it because that was something that would make me different from others. Right. And especially when it came to pain, it was like, oh, like suck it up and just keep moving forward. It's not, you know, because you don't want to be perceived as weak or as a liability to your team. Right. And honestly, like when I saw women take time off because they were suffering from cramps, I don't think I wasn't like I think I was very judgmental back then. And I just thought like, oh, like they're making us look bad, you know, like we shouldn't, it's such a mind, I don't want to use a swear word on this, but just to look back and remember how I was back then and the way that I thought about my own body and how to present myself to a very strong male culture, right? And how to fit into that. I think that was an issue then, and I think it might still be an issue today, and not just in the military. I think even in the civilian world, I think how do women fit into these very male dominant work, you know, fields, and how do we be ourselves while feeling like we can fully be ourselves, you know, and not be perceived as less or, you know, so it's a lot of stuff. I'm still, I think through the making of this film, it really made me think about a lot of these questions and kind of understand my own experiences better. You know, like you had days when I was deployed, I had days where I would be going on missions and it's like, I don't know, 120 degrees and you have your full battle rattle, which is like your vest, you know, your Kevlar, your weapon. And it's like, I don't know, 50, 60 pounds of additional gear that you're carrying on your body. And you're going out there sweating through everything that you have, and you're on your period. And it's such a, and you're suffering in this way, right? But you never talk about it. Like you don't want anyone to know that this is happening to you underneath everything else, right? And I wish if I could have talked about it, how much easier it would be to just tell someone, hey, like I'm not feeling well today, you know, and that's all you need to be able to share. But the fact of like being just afraid, like how someone will perceive you because of that, or they might lose respect for you because of that. I think that it has like psychological impact on your well-being. And I hope that for the women in the military today, and more women are joining today, like we're making up a larger percentage of recruits today than we did even 20 years ago. And I hope that with this film and with the conversation that we're having, that this becomes easier for this new generation.
Thank you for being so honest with the responses and how hard it's been. There are definitely several questions. I don't know that we'll get to all of them. There's one in particular right now. I'm going to try to get to most. It specifically talks about the stigma, since we're on this topic, by Emmy Mills. It says, have you ever felt supported by possible female supporters, as in being able to talk to a female captain about these issues? Or do you feel like that was still a fear if you had anybody kind of superior above you?
I think Sati hit on this, that I think sometimes as women in a military environment that we sometimes may not feel empowered by our female counterparts, because we're all trying to be perceived as being strong and really assimilating ourselves to the male environment and the male the perfect image of the male soldier or airman or whatever. And I think that's hard. I don't think that's true for everyone. I think that we have plenty of women that support and empower each other and help each other out and share products and share tips on making things better. But I think that, let's not minimize the fact that sometimes women may not be as supportive as they could be to other women that are dealing with, period issues, particularly in a male-dominated environment like the military.
Yeah, I think for me, I did have support from my battle buddies, of course, and which is really nice. Like especially when you're deployed, the military assigns you your battle buddy who's going to go with you everywhere you go. Which is for your safety, and which is also just to keep you from doing anything that would jeopardize the mission, or, so having a battle buddy definitely makes a huge difference during your time overseas. I did have a female commander for the first half of my deployment, but not once did we talk about periods or period health, any of these issues. She was a phenomenal leader. She was a lieutenant colonel. I can't imagine everything that she overcame to get to be where she was. But we just we pretended that these things didn't exist, that we were all the same, just like our male buddies. And yeah.
It's all just how period stigma is just embedded in every part of our society, right? So we have a question from Tess, and I think it's directed towards Sati. While volunteering on Skid Row, Sati, did you hear anything about the effects of period poverty in prisons in the area? And if so, how are those politics similar or different from the politics of menstruators for both veterans and active military?
I did not. I'm not too familiar with what happens in prisons. And as far as like shelters on Skid Row go that serve women specifically, and some of them serve female veterans, what I've heard is that a lot of the shelters limit, how many period products you can get per day. So anywhere from like 2 to 3 pads or tampons per woman, which of course is, if you're on a heavy period, that's just definitely not enough. And I think part of the problem has been the way the grants are allocated for these shelters. In a lot of the language of the grant, you're allowed to use the money for buying blankets and other items, but not period products. And so I know there's a lot of work being done to change that so that the shelters can buy more products and not just rely on donations from people for these.
I wanted to answer, I just noticed this question from Emmy Mills about essentials and what the military provides. And I just wanted to address this really quick. The military will provide any birth control and possibly pain medication that the soldier, airman, service member needs. It just needs to be a discussion with the provider prior to them going on deployment. But yeah, those things are actually supplied for free, and they usually generally get enough to get them through the deployment. So I just wanted to answer that question.
So the question follows. The question was, in terms of the essentials that the military provides, does that include prescribed medicine or allergy medicine? As in, would they pay for birth control or possibly pain medication? And so, since you talked about that, Elis, I'm curious if you may get it from your healthcare provider. Do you know if period products are something that is provided through that as well?
No. That's, period products are considered personal hygiene. So that's up to the service member to supply themselves with that. And I think that's why it's as Sati said, it's an issue because, here we're getting deployed to God knows where, and we may not have access to a place to get these products, but yet the military provides us with everything we need to get through that deployment. Then they go as far as providing sports bras, but they don't provide hygiene type products. That's something that's on our deployment list, but it's up to us to get what we need.
And when you're getting deployed, I mean, for our case, we were limited to 2 military issued duffel bags of stuff. So if you're trying to pack for the next 3 months, all these period products, they take up space. And so if they're taking up space in your duffel bag, like what are the items you're having to leave behind, right? And so it's like this weird dance you have to do when packing, like how much can I really fit into this duffel bag? And I remember that being a very like packing and repacking and packing and repacking. And then I would tell my parents to just mail it to me.
I was just going to say that, Sati. And that's the other thing. It's like, I know a lot of deployers will also set up boxes and have their family mail them at a certain specific time so that they have a constant supply of whatever they need. But Sati, you brought up a good point because there's a picture of me on Facebook with like 16 bags on deployment. And it's like, I can't add anything else. And you have to add all your military issue stuff and all the equipment to get you through basically a year of being deployed. And now you have to add period products, which do take a lot of space. So that's also another great point that we hadn't talked about, but it's so true.
Yeah, so we'll have a couple more questions. We'll almost be done. This has been a great conversation thus far. Michael shared another important theme addressed in the short film. So checking in back with the film is re-entering civilian life and interviewing for jobs. Is there anything that you wish hiring managers or employers would be more aware of or mindful of when speaking to veterans about their military experience?
This is like another whole panel. That's a can of worms. What I will say is, in a very short, succinct answer, is that there are a lot of organizations and companies out there that say they support the veteran community, but when we actually get hired because they like our resume, they like our leadership experience, our education, and so forth, when we get into those organizations, we're not allowed to really flourish and grow and just do our thing. I think the media, a lot of companies, if they have or leaders that have no experience with military veterans, they are also, their perception is whatever they have seen in media, whatever they've seen in the news, or movies. And a lot of it is, a lot of negative stuff. Oh, if this veteran got deployed, then obviously they have PTSD. And the average civilian has more PTSD issues from car accidents and abuse than the veteran does from being deployed. So I think that's a really big issue, but I think that's why it's so important to do storytelling and to tell our stories as veterans and continue to present the positive stories that are out there, because as veterans, we have very unique job skills that most civilians would kill for. We have tons of leadership experience and education on conflict management and just, global experience from, traveling and deploying all over the world. But I think that most civilians, especially if they've never had experience with veterans, they really don't even know what questions to ask. They say, thank you for your service. And that's the end of the conversation. So that's a great question.
So what can civilians do to support service members who menstruate, who are deployed?
Well, one thing that we were talking about, I think, was care packages. So until this issue gets resolved somehow, I think send care packages to the deployed veterans or deployed soldiers overseas. And in those care packages, send tampons and period products. And I think Elis had shared a story about the pink boxes. Elis, do you want to talk about that?
I don't know the specific organizations, but I've heard from other veteran groups that while they were deployed, there were organizations that sent specific care packages that were pink and were specifically directed to the female service member that were deployed. And in those packages, there were peri products, Motrin, Midol, things to kind of get the service member through that period, through their deployment. So there are organizations that are doing that work. And if you are a civilian and want to send care packages, with the candy and all the other stuff that you send, don't be shy to not send some peri products that may actually really help someone that's deployed. And hey, and I told the others, I was like, peri products can actually be used for other things besides periods. If there's a gunshot wound, and let's be honest, because we're at war, that gunshot wound, if there's not enough bandages, we can use pads for, to hold compression, to hold, to save a service member. So there's multiple ways to think about this issue as civilians that want to support service members.
And so specifically just to the film, for those of you who got a chance to see it, or if you haven't yet, when you do watch it, what is one key message you hope viewers of this film can take away after watching this film? And I'll ask YJ, the producer, to start us off with that response.
Well, I think there's a number of subjects that are very important in this film. It's one of the reasons I wanted to be involved, because it's so powerful. Sati did an amazing job capturing all these layers of things. So I'd say for me, obviously we're here to talk about, periods in the military, but I think generally period poverty, the subject of period poverty, and actually the work that you guys do, Dama, is I think the whole purpose of the film now is to use it just like we're doing right now, to have these conversations, to get people engaged, to figure out how do we get to a place where we can, have the people that are making these policies and changing the ability to have access to this. So I think one key message is how we can all do something, even if it's donating period products to a local shelter or something like that.
The other component I would just add to that, that was important to us when we were making this film, is to just kind of make visible the people that that this country doesn't see, which is female veterans. We don't exist in the media. We don't exist in pop culture images, right? And so I think when people watch this film, the screenings we've had in LA before the pandemic, we would have so many audience members, especially older men, come and talk to us and say, "Oh, I never thought about women in the military or they're transitioning back to civilian life, but that might be, And so I think that is the visibility we want to bring to an entire group of people who are just sort of invisible, And I think having our lead protagonist, being a veteran herself, and you get to see her in this role, it's like that's what a veteran looks like. It's not like we have these ideas of what women who are in the military might look like, but it can be anybody. There's no one type of a veteran.
Thank you. And how will this film be accessible after February 2021?
So as of right now, we have a few more festivals. We've been kind of doing film festivals for the past, year, almost year and a half now. Well, no, almost a year. April was our first true premiere through Tribeca. But we'll do a few more festivals, and then also we hope to make the film available with organizations like yours. I don't know if some of you may have seen in the chat, but Kelly, thank you for mentioning here that you have an upcoming campaign that is exactly what we want to use the film for. So if you're interested in following, you can follow us on social media. We have a web page, we have Instagram, Facebook, all of that. And we do share as we have new events. And at some point, I'd imagine a film will be available, on an ongoing basis. We just haven't determined that quite yet for that exact time. And I'd say definitely probably by the end of this year. But yeah, just stay tuned.
And we're going to close out, but I'd love to just kind of end if there's anything else you all as a panelist want to share about periods in the military, anything you want civilians or veterans to be aware of regarding this topic, or something you would hope to see in the future.
You know, one thing I want to say that when I first saw this film, because I connected with Sati over a podcast she did, this film automatically like just touched me for so many different reasons, not only as a woman, but as a woman veteran. But also I remembering being at work one day, taking care of a patient and having a huge incident at work and realizing that I still needed to work, and yet my uniform was completely stained. So there's so many issues that this film covered. But one of the things I really want to hit on that Sati said is like, you know what, we as women, we serve too. And I think if you take nothing away from that is that, remember that you don't know, the typical American stance is that when they think of veterans, they think of a white male. Well, there's a lot more demographics to that than just a typical white male. There's a lot of women that have served and have continued to serve our great country. And we're in the war zones. We are everywhere in the military, not just serving as nurses and secretaries and all those things. We're serving in all different branches and all different jobs and fields. And we're out there contributing. And the transition period to the civilian sector for women veterans is extraordinary and researched very well, evidence-based, that it's much harder for us to transition into the civilian sector for jobs than men.
Even for me, like, I don't think I knew Sati was a veteran before I read this. Like, I don't recall like noting it, if that makes sense. And then I remember when we first talked about it, and there's a line in the film that says, "But you don't look like a veteran." And in my mind, when I realized that, you know, we all have areas that we can expand our mind to, and different people we can learn about. And I mean, this is someone that was in my space already that I hadn't really connected that, especially not this powerfully. So yeah, just to add to what Elis says, like, not only with these subjects, but just in general, this is why Sati and I are filmmakers. This is why I will work day in, day out, all hours of the day on films that are powerful and amazing, like this one written by Sati, is to use the arts as a tool to raise awareness and to educate. So thank you to everyone that's here today, and thank you, Dama, and to Period.org and the movement to use our film and partner with us in this way. We're really honored, and it truly does help, like, kind of bring it full circle to why we're doing it to begin with.
Yeah, just adding to what YJ said, thank you everyone for joining us on a weekday. And I hope that you shared, the film is available until the end of the month. So please share this film with your family, your friends, your coworkers, just because we just want people to understand who women veterans are and what are some of the things that we deal with, and the more people see this kind of representation, I think the better this world would be. Oh, and sorry, I just wanted to add to something that YJ had said. I didn't know that what she just shared was really moving to me. And I think part of the reason she didn't realize I was a veteran is because for a long time after I came back from the war, I didn't talk about being a veteran, because anytime I mentioned it, people would just look at me like they misheard me, or that they would actually ask me like, "Oh, but you don't look like a veteran." And I wouldn't know what to say to that. So I just stopped telling people, because I was like, clearly, like, I don't exist in people's consciousness. So why would I talk about being a veteran? Two, people have a lot of negative ideas about veterans, right? And so it's like, you don't want to be associated with those negative stereotypes, so you hide it. And three, as a woman, I think it took me a long time to understand that I was also a veteran, because so many of the services were for men. And it's like, men are veterans, women are just soldiers who serve and come home, and I think the culture has changed, thank goodness, since then. And now there is so much more support, and we are having these conversations, but it's taken time. And I think just through all of us having these conversations with our family and friends and telling stories wherever and however we can is how we have a more cohesive and accurate view of what our military looks like and who we are.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our panelists. We at Period are very honored to have had you all share and really have honest conversations with us about that experience. Thank you to all of our guests joining us today. We're very excited. We're gonna close out now. Again, thank you all. My name is Damaris Pereda and I'm the National Programs Director for Period. And we invite you to stay at Period and stay connected with Period by following us at Period Movement or at www.period.org.